Fox found the orchard sluice the way a smart animal finds a loophole, by watching, waiting, and learning exactly where humans stopped paying attention. The orchard sat in the low valley outside Hartswell, where the hills held back wind and the soil stayed dark enough to stain your boots. Rows of apple trees ran straight as stitched lines, their branches pruned into disciplined shapes that made harvesting easier and made every mistake visible. In early autumn, when the fruit was heavy and the leaves were starting to turn, the orchard smelled sweet all day. Apples, damp grass, crushed leaves, and the faint tang of irrigation water. Milo Hart owned the place now. His father had planted most of the older rows, and his grandfather had dug the first drainage ditches by hand. Milo was 36, broad-shouldered, and patient in the slow, practical way people became when their work was measured in seasons instead of hours. He also had a problem he didn't like admitting, because it sounded like a children's story. Something was stealing his windfalls. Windfalls were the apples that dropped early, too bruised to sell as premium fruit, but perfect for cider, vinegar, pig feed, and the local farm stand's seconds bin. Milo didn't mind losing a few to deer or birds. That was the price of growing food outdoors. But lately, the windfalls were vanishing first, not after a day, not after a week. Overnight. Milo noticed it the morning he drove the ATV down row 14 with a crate and found bare grass under trees that had dropped a dozen apples the evening before. He stopped the ATV, engine ticking quietly, and stared at the ground as if the orchard had played a trick. He hopped off, walked under the nearest tree, and kicked at the grass. Nothing. No bruised fruit, no half-eaten cores, no messy peels like a raccoon left, not even the scatter of seeds that told you birds had been at it. Just empty ground and a faint disturbance in the dew, like something had moved through carefully. Milo crouched, thumb brushing the wet grass. He found a track, light, oval, with 4 toes and a narrow pad. Not dog, not cat, fox. He straightened and looked toward the orchard's lower edge, where the rows met a drainage ditch lined with reeds. That ditch fed into the irrigation sluice, an old concrete box with a metal gate that controlled water level for the whole orchard. The sluice wasn't glamorous. It was a utility point. Algae on concrete, rust on bolts, a slow trickle of water that carried leaves and the occasional lost apple down to the creek. Milo's father always said, "Everything in the orchard ends up at the sluice." He'd meant leaves and branches. Milo began to suspect he'd meant something else too. That afternoon, Milo asked Nora Quinn to stop by. Nora lived 2 farms over and ran the local wildlife rehab hotline. She wasn't a ranger. She wasn't law enforcement. She was the person people called when a deer got tangled in fencing or a hawk clipped a wing on a power line. She knew animals in the practical way. Less romance, more reality. She arrived in her dusty hatchback, stepped out wearing rubber boots and a faded jacket, and listened while Milo explained the missing windfalls like he was confessing to something embarrassing. "They're just gone," he finished, spreading his hands. "I'd blame deer, but deer don't clean like that. And it's not raccoons. Raccoons leave a mess." Nora crouched under the same tree Milo had checked and sniffed the air like she was tasting the orchard. "Fox," she said immediately. Milo blinked. "That fast?" he asked. Nora pointed at a faint line in the grass where dew was disturbed, a narrow path that cut between trunks. "That's a run," she said. "Fox uses the same route repeatedly. And, see this?" She pointed again at a small cluster of droppings near the ditch bank, dark, twisted, with bits of apple skin visible. "Apple diet," she said. "Not just mice." Milo's eyebrows rose. "Foxes eat apples?" he asked. Nora shrugged. "Foxes eat whatever is easy," she replied. "Fruit is sugar. Sugar is calories. Calories in fall matter." Milo looked down at the ditch. So it's eating the windfalls, he said, half relieved it wasn't something more destructive. Nora's expression stayed neutral. Maybe, she said. Or it's taking them. Milo frowned. Taking them where? He asked. Nora stood and gestured toward the lower end of the orchard. Let's walk, she said. They followed the ditch line, stepping over roots and flattened grass. The ditch carried a thin stream, and along its edge were signs of traffic. Small tracks, a few broken reeds, a narrow tunnel through the vegetation where something moved without snagging fur. They reached the sluice. It was exactly what Milo remembered from childhood. A concrete box half sunk into earth, with a rusted hand wheel for the gate and a small metal grate meant to catch debris. Water slid through with a soft, constant sound, carrying leaves and bits of foam. But what Milo hadn't noticed before was the way the bank around the sluice looked. Organized, not by humans. There were apple cores tucked under a clump of grass, half hidden. A few whole windfall apples, bruised but intact, pushed into a shallow hollow as if stored. And there, under the concrete lip where the box met soil, was a dark opening, small, just big enough for a fox to slip through. A den entrance. Milo stared. You've got to be kidding, he muttered. Nora crouched near the opening and sniffed. Active, she said. Warm scent. And look. She pointed at the apples again. That's not random feeding. That's caching. Fox caches apples? Milo asked, incredulous. Nora shrugged again. Fox caches food, she said. Could be apples because they last longer than a dead mouse in warm weather. Could be for kits. Could be just habit. Milo looked back up the orchard rows. So it's coming up at night, he said slowly, collecting the windfalls and bringing them back here. Nora nodded. And the sluice is perfect, she said. Cover. Water sound hides movement. Humans don't spend time here. You come check the gate, you leave. It's a quiet corner. Milo felt a weird mix of frustration and admiration. He'd spent his whole life thinking of the sluice as a tool. The fox had found it as a base. And the windfalls vanish first, Milo said, voice tight now. Because they're easiest to pick up. Nora looked at him. Also because they're safest, she said. No jumping, no climbing, no risk, just carry and go. Milo rubbed his forehead. How many apples can a fox take? He asked, trying to think in numbers. Nora smiled faintly. More than you want, she said. One fox can make many trips, and if it has kits, the demand is constant. Milo stared at the den hole and suddenly pictured small fox kits playing among apples like toys. It almost made him soften. Almost. He had a cider order to fill, pigs to feed, and thin margins like everyone else. Losing crates of windfalls wasn't a charming wildlife documentary. It was lost income. He also didn't want to poison or harm anything. He wasn't that kind of farmer, and Nora wouldn't allow it anyway. So what do I do? He asked. Nora stood and brushed dirt off her hands. First, she said, we confirm. Trail camera. If it's one fox or more, if there are kits, if it's using the den actively. Milo nodded. He had a camera used for deer on the upper ridge. He could move it. Second, Nora continued, we change access, not with violence, with inconvenience. Milo frowned. How do I inconvenience a fox? He asked. Nora pointed to the ditch path. You break the route, she said. Foxes love predictable runs. You put obstacles where it likes to travel, not traps, just things it hates. Motion lights, noisy tape, strong scent, and... She looked at the orchard. You clean up windfalls sooner. Milo grimaced. That's more labor, he said. Nora's eyes held his. Yes, she said simply. Or you keep donating apples to a fox family. Milo let out a short breath. Okay, he said. Camera tonight. They set it up that evening, mounting it low on a stake near the sluice, angled toward the den entrance and the ditch run. Nora advised him on positioning. Don't aim at water glare. Keep it stable. Make sure the sensor line wasn't blocked by reeds. When they finished, the sun was low, turning the orchard gold. Wind brushed the trees, and a few apples thudded softly to the ground. Fresh windfalls. Milo looked at them and felt his irritation sharpen, because now every dropped apple felt like a coin falling into someone else's pocket. He spent the next hour gathering windfalls into crates, working faster than usual. He didn't catch them all, he never could, but he reduced the easy supply. Night fell. Milo woke at 3 a.m. without knowing why. He lay in bed listening to the distant creak, and then, faintly, to something else. A small barking call that sounded like laughter cut short. Fox. He didn't get up. He didn't shine lights. He didn't chase. Nora had told him, if you spook it tonight, you learn nothing. So he waited for morning. At first light, Milo walked down to the sluice with coffee in hand and the uneasy anticipation of someone about to read a verdict. The camera's indicator light blinked. It had recorded. He took the card inside and loaded it on his laptop at the kitchen table. His wife, Tessa, leaned over his shoulder, curious. The first clips showed nothing but reeds swaying. Then, at 11:47 p.m., a fox appeared. It came down the ditch run like it had a schedule. Sleek red coat, black legs, white chest, tail thick. It paused at the sluice, sniffed, and then looked directly at the camera for a second, as if it knew it was being watched. Then it trotted off and returned a minute later, carrying an apple in its mouth. A whole apple. It set the apple near the den entrance, pushed it with its nose into the hollow, then went back up the ditch. It returned again, and again, and again. Milo watched, jaw tight, as the fox made trip after trip, each one efficient, quiet. No playing, no hesitation. It moved like a worker on a route. At 12:19 a.m., the fox arrived with an apple and stopped at the den hole. Two small faces appeared. Kits. One, then another, then three, tumbling out like shadows. They sniffed the apple, pawed it, and one tried to drag it into the hole but couldn't manage the weight. The mother fox nudged it in for them. Milo felt his anger wobble. Tessa made a soft sound. "They're babies," she whispered. Milo rubbed his face. "They're expensive babies," he muttered, but his voice lacked bite. Then the footage changed his mood again. At 1:03 a.m., another fox appeared. Larger, maybe a male. It didn't approach the den directly. It hung back in the reeds, watched, then trotted up the ditch toward the orchard with purpose. Two foxes. A pair. A family. Milo leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "So that's why," he said. Tessa nodded. "They're feeding the kits," she said. Milo stared at the screen where the kits wrestled with an apple like it was a toy and a meal. The fox had found the orchard sluice, and now the orchard was paying for it. Milo closed the laptop and looked out the window at the rows of trees, heavy with fruit. He wasn't going to shoot them. He wasn't going to poison them. He wasn't going to pretend it wasn't happening. He had to change the rules of the orchard in a way that made the sluice less perfect and the windfalls less effortless. Because the fox wasn't stealing out of spite. It was stealing because Milo had built a system that dropped sugar onto the ground every night, and the quietest corner of the whole farm was already hollowed into a den. And unless Milo acted, the windfalls would keep vanishing first, one apple at a time, until the kits grew big enough to run the route themselves. The next day, Milo did what farmers always did when something started costing money. He tried the simplest fix first. He cleaned harder. He and Tessa went out with crates right after breakfast and walked the rows collecting windfalls while the grass was still wet. It was slow work, bending and lifting, stepping around low branches. The apples were cold from night air, slick with dew. By the time they filled the first crates, Milo's back already complained, and he hadn't even reached the lower rows where apples fell most. "Feels like we're racing the ground," Tessa said, straightening and rubbing her palms. "We are," Milo replied. They kept going anyway. By noon, they had cleared most of the visible windfalls and stacked crates near the shed for sorting. Milo looked at the orchard floor and felt a grim satisfaction. If there was nothing to pick up, the fox would have to hunt mice like every other fox. Then afternoon wind arrived. Not storm wind, just steady valley wind that shook branches in a way you couldn't control. Apples began dropping again, soft thuds hidden by grass. Milo watched one roll a few feet downhill and stop right on the ditch edge like it had been placed. He sighed. "Okay," he muttered. "So cleaning is part of it, not all of it." That evening, Nora returned with a roll of reflective tape, a bag of cheap solar motion lights, and the practical expression of someone used to negotiating between humans and clever animals. "You've got a family," she said, more statement than question. "2 adults, at least 3 kits," Milo replied. Nora nodded. "Kits change everything," she said. "Because the adults won't just quit. They'll work harder." Milo crossed his arms. "I don't want them dead," he said. "I want them elsewhere." Nora's eyes softened slightly. "Then you need to make elsewhere easier than here," she said. "Right now, your orchard is a buffet with a nursery attached." They walked down to the sluice together. The sun was low, and the ditch water sounded louder at this hour, a steady whisper that made the corner feel private. The den hole was unchanged, dark and clean-edged. Milo pointed. "Can we block it?" he asked. Nora shook her head immediately. "Not with kits," she said. "You trap or block the adults out. You starve the kits. You block them in. You trap them. Either way, you create a crisis." Milo grimaced. "So we just accept it?" he asked. Nora crouched and studied the ditch run, the narrow tunnel through reeds where the fox traveled. "We change the travel," she said. "We change the comfort. We change the timing." "How?" Milo asked. Nora stood and began walking along the ditch edge, pointing as she spoke. "First, break the run. Foxes love a clean path. We clutter it. Brush piles, loose branches, things that snag fur. Not a barrier they can't cross, just friction." Milo nodded slowly. He could do friction. "Second," Nora continued, "light. Not constant. Surprise. Motion lights set low near the sluice and the ditch entry. It doesn't have to scare it forever, just long enough to make this corner feel less safe." Milo glanced at the shadows under the reeds. "This place is perfect for them," he said. "Exactly," Nora replied. "We make it imperfect." "And third?" Milo asked. Nora looked up the orchard rows. "Windfalls," she said. "You don't have to pick up every apple every hour, but you can reduce what's easy. You can also change where windfalls collect." Milo frowned. "I can't stop apples falling," he said. "No," Nora agreed. "But you can stop them from becoming neat, carryable prizes." She walked to a row where the ground sloped gently toward the ditch. "See this grade?" she asked. "Apples roll downhill. They collect near the ditch. That's why the fox run is efficient. Apples fall, roll toward its highway, and it carries them straight to the den." Milo stared at the slope like he'd never seen it before, and felt irritated that she was right. "What do I do?" he asked. Nora pointed to the grass. "You create catch zones," she said. "Small berms of mulch, straw wattles, even a line of boards. Anything that stops apples from rolling into the ditch corridor. Make them stop in the rows where you can pick them up on your schedule." Milo exhaled. "So basically," he said, I build an apple speed bump. Nora smiled faintly. Exactly, she said. Farm engineering. They worked that evening. Milo dragged dead branches and trimmed brush to clutter the ditch run. He didn't destroy habitat. Nora stopped him when he got too enthusiastic, but he made the path less clean. Tessa placed motion lights on short stakes around the sluice area, angled so they would flare when something moved through the reeds. The lights looked harmless in daylight, like cheap garden decorations. At night, they would become sudden eyes. Then Milo built 2 quick catch lines using straw bales and an old length of board, placing them across the downhill slope between the lower rows and the ditch. It wasn't pretty. It didn't have to be. It just had to stop apples from rolling into the fox's delivery route. By full dark, the orchard felt subtly changed. The lower corner no longer looked like a perfect quiet tunnel. It looked like a human had started paying attention. Milo was tired. Tessa's shoulders ached. They stood by the sluice for a moment, listening to the water and the frogs, waiting for some sign that their work mattered. Nothing happened. Tonight will tell, Nora said, as if reading Milo's mind. But don't expect one night to rewrite a habit. Foxes test. Milo nodded, though he wished he didn't have to learn patience in a lesson that stole his apples. That night he woke again around 2 a.m., not because of a call, but because his mind was listening. He stared at the ceiling for a minute, then finally grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The orchard was quiet. Stars sharp overhead. The rows were darker than the sky, a grid of shadow. He walked down toward the lower ditch, moving carefully so his boots didn't crunch too loud. He didn't carry a flashlight. He let moonlight do the work. As he approached the sluice corner, one of the motion lights flared. A bright white burst that turned reeds into pale spears. Milo froze. In the sudden light, a fox stood perfectly still at the edge of the ditch run. Its body was angled toward the orchard, but its head was turned toward the light, eyes narrowed. It didn't bolt. It didn't yelp. It watched. Then another motion light triggered a second later as the fox shifted its weight, and the corner lit again from a different angle. The fox took 2 slow steps backward, tail low, not scared, annoyed. Milo held his breath. The fox turned and moved along the ditch line, heading toward the orchard rows. But when it reached the first straw catch line, it stopped. It looked down at the board and straw as if confronted with a new rule. It tried to step over. The board wobbled slightly. Straw shifted, making a soft scraping sound. A third light flared. The fox recoiled a half step, then circled, searching for its clean run. Milo realized something in that moment. Foxes weren't only driven by hunger. They were driven by efficiency. Their whole body was built for saving energy. Every extra obstacle cost them. The fox finally found a path around the catch line, wide, slower, and slipped between 2 rows. Milo crept back uphill, not wanting to chase it. He'd seen what he needed. The fox was being forced to work harder. In the morning, Milo checked the lower rows. Apples had still fallen. There were still windfalls, but fewer had rolled into the ditch corridor. Most had stopped at the straw lines, gathered in small clusters he could collect later. He walked down to the sluice and inspected the den entrance. The apples cached near it were fewer than before. The ground was disturbed, and one motion light had been bumped slightly, but it still worked. Nora arrived later and pulled the camera card again. They watched the footage at Milo's kitchen table. At 11:52 p.m., the vixen approached the ditch run and triggered the lights. She paused longer than Milo expected, watching the lights like she was trying to understand their pattern. Then she moved off, circled wide, and entered the orchard from a different angle. At 12:17 a.m., the male arrived and did the same, stopped, watched, then took a longer route. At 12:40 a.m., the vixen returned with an apple, but not a whole apple. A half-eaten one. Milo leaned forward. "She didn't bring a whole," he murmured. Nora nodded. "She's eating more in place," she said, "because carrying is harder now." At 1:10 a.m., the kits appeared at the den entrance, looking around. One tried to run up the ditch run and stopped at the cluttered brush pile, sniffing, uncertain. It backed away, tail twitching. Milo watched that clip twice. "It's teaching them," he said quietly. Nora nodded. "The kits are learning routes," she said. "Right now, they're learning the sluice is home, but if this corner becomes inconvenient enough, they'll shift their home base when they're older." Milo felt a small relief. Not victory, nothing that clean, but a change in trajectory. For the next week, Milo and Tessa kept at it. They collected windfalls on a tighter schedule, especially after windy afternoons. Milo adjusted the straw lines, moving them slightly when apples began rolling around the ends. He added one more motion light, because foxes were already testing the dark gaps. The foxes didn't disappear. They adapted. One night the male approached from the creek side instead of the ditch, avoiding the lights entirely. Milo found the tracks in the mud the next morning, clean paw prints like a signature. Another night, the vixen carried apples in smaller pieces, making more trips, but taking less each time. The kits began exploring the orchard edges, drawn by smell. Milo's orchard had become part of their education. That's when the situation shifted from annoying to urgent. One morning, Milo found Windfalls missing again, but not from the lower rows, from near the barn. He stopped, stared at the bare patch under a tree by the equipment shed, and felt his stomach drop. They were expanding. The sluice had been their quiet base. Now the Fox family was learning the whole farm. Milo walked back to the house, jaw tight, and found Tessa washing dishes. He didn't speak immediately. He just set a single fox track photo he'd taken on his phone in front of her. "They're up by the barn," he said. Tessa's face tightened. "That's closer," she whispered. Milo nodded. "And if the kits learn the barn area," he said, "next they'll learn the chicken run, or the compost, or the feed." Tessa dried her hands slowly. "So what now?" she asked. Milo looked out the window toward the orchard rows and then down toward the sluice corner that had started all of this. Now it wasn't just about cider apples, it was about boundaries. He exhaled and said the sentence he'd been avoiding because it meant escalation, work, decisions, maybe conflict with neighbors. "We stopped feeding them," he said. "Completely. No easy sugar, no easy scraps. And we make the sluice corner a place they don't want to raise a family." Tessa nodded once, grim. "How?" she asked. Milo's eyes hardened, but his plan stayed nonviolent. "We coordinate," he said. "We call Nora. We call the county. If they're denning in that bank, there are rules. There are humane options. One-way doors after the kits can travel, habitat modification, relocation if allowed." Tessa looked relieved and worried at the same time. "And if it's not allowed?" she asked. Milo didn't like the answer, but he said it anyway. "Then we outlast them," he replied. "Kits grow, they move, families shift, but we can't let the farm stay easy." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the shed, because the first step of outlasting was always boring. Picking up apples, moving straw lines, tightening routines. As he walked, he glanced down toward the sluice. The water still whispered. The corner still looked quiet and safe. But Milo knew now that quiet was exactly what predators used. And the only way to keep Windfalls from vanishing first was to make the orchard's quiet corners belong to the humans again. Through attention, through effort, and through a kind of patience that didn't feel noble at all when your back hurt and your cider crates were lighter than they should be.